Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay, and this is Reality Asserts Itself. Continuing our discussion with Norman Solomon, who joins us again in the studio. Thanks for joining us, Norman.
Thanks, Paul.
Quickly, Norman is the Executive Director of the Institute for Public Accuracy and co-founder of the group rootsaction.org. So, we've been talking about many things, but the theme that's been running throughout has been the fight within the Democratic Party, the role of the oligarchy that represents the leadership of the Democratic Party, or the vice versa, how a section of the leadership of the Democratic Party is essentially an extension of the oligarchy. And although they want to call themselves progressive, it doesn't mean much anymore. The word progressive doesn't mean anything. And one of the issues on which one cannot judge the Democratic Party leadership as being progressive is how they treat whistleblowers, which one would think if one was progressive, you'd be for more transparency. But the Obama administration, if I understand it correctly, went after more whistleblowers than any president in history. So this ties to a lot of your work, so tie the two together for us.
Yeah, the Obama administration went after more whistleblowers than every other president since 1917 combined. You know, there had been three. One of them, Daniel Ellsberg, prosecuted under Nixon. Obama went after 9. And there were some of them names we know, like Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, John Kiriakou, Jeffrey Sterling. And one of the definitions, really, of democracy is the informed consent of the governed. But when it comes to so-called national security policy, whether you're Democrat or Republican in the White House, there's a real interest in not having the informed consent of the governed. And if you don't have information, if you're not informed and you're governed, then it's not democracy at all. So that's sort of the goal, is to keep us uninformed. Whistleblowers screw that up. Whistleblowers who provide us with information, as Dan Ellsberg did in terms of the Pentagon Papers, as Snowden did to disprove the lies about surveillance, as John Kiriakou did at the CIA in terms of torture, Chelsea Manning dispelling a lot of lies, implicit or explicit, about the humane U.S. war effort in Iraq and so forth. Those are dangerous people. They're dangerous because they fight for the public to be informed. And at the Institute for Public Accuracy, back in early 2003, we took up the cause of Catherine Gunn, which unfortunately is still a name virtually unknown in the U.S. But she worked for the GCHQ, the equivalent of the NSA, in Britain. And just weeks, really, before the invasion of Iraq, she came to work, had a cup of coffee, turned on a computer, and she saw a memo from the NSA that showed that the U.S. intelligence service and the British one were going to wiretap and surveil some of the swing votes on the UN Security Council in New York to find out how to push them to vote for an invasion of Iraq. And here you've got a woman, she's maybe 27 years old, she's a translator of Mandarin, and all of a sudden she's confronted with this really diabolical plot. And she was supposed to avert her eyes and pretend she didn't see it. Instead, she whistleblew the document to the Observer newspaper in Britain, and it was huge news around the world, except in the United States. And so at the Institute for Public Accuracy, we organized, we tried as best we could to publicize. We got famous people, including Sean Penn, to write letters in support of her. And eventually, because Tony Blair did not want to have discovery to expose how he ignored advice that his support for the invasion of Iraq was illegal under international law, they eventually dropped her charges. But she could have spent a couple of years in prison. And for me, personally, that was a real eye-opener. I didn't meet her until quite a bit later. But the power of whistleblowing. And so at IPA, we launched the Exposed Facts organization as one of our programs several years ago. And we're directly involved with people who are on an advisory board, who we do organizing with. We set up programs and publicity for people like John Kiriakou, Tom Drake, the great whistleblower from the NSA. We're close with Daniel Ellsberg as well.
And just let me add, we have interviews with all of these people on The Real News. So if you check out these names, you'll see various interviews with just about all the whistleblowers being mentioned here.
Yeah, and I'm leaving out quite a few names. So we have had this great experience of being able to befriend and help as best we can whistleblowers to get their voices out. The really great independent journalist Marcy Wheeler and I sat for 2 weeks in the courtroom when the CIA whistleblower Jeffrey Sterling was on trial, a kangaroo court in the Eastern District of Virginia Federal District Court. You can imagine people out there, they work for the CIA, these military contractors, Pentagon, and they convicted him. And he's finishing up now 3 years in prison. And so to sit there and see all that and see how little of that information gets through the mass media has been very motivating to me. At rootsaction.org, where I also work, we've raised a lot of money for the Sterling family, the Sterling Family Fund, which is on GoFundMe. We've done a lot of fundraising through our whistleblower public education campaign for Tom Drake and John Kiriakou. And the net result is that rootsaction.org has, good news, bad news, been by far the largest online action group in this country to unequivocally support all of these whistleblowers that I mentioned and more. Frankly, and this is sort of what I would summarize as groups like the ACLU, the Committee to Protect Journalists, the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, when it comes to whistleblowers from the CIA and the NSA and other such agencies, they turn tail and run. They don't want to be tainted with support for those whistleblowers. And at rootsaction.org and at Exposed Facts, those whistleblowers are our heroes, and we welcome them and we do all we can to support them.
And getting back to the sort of the theme of the struggle within the Democratic Party, you can really see how the leadership of the Democratic Party, corporate Democrats who want to position themselves as progressive and almost like against, they won't use the language against the oligarchs, as we saw in that Tom Perez, Bernie Sanders side by side on the Chris Hayes show.
Yeah.
Perez could not get those words out of his mouth.
Right.
On the other hand, they want to associate themselves as much as possible with the kind of left populist message when they're out of power. But when it comes to the foreign policy and you come to see how whistleblowers are treated, you really see how enmeshed and part of the deep permanent state the Democratic Party leadership is. They know how to wage war. They know how to drop drones. They know how to order the CIA. When it comes to this relationship with this deep state that whistleblowers expose, there's really no difference between the two parties, at least when you're talking about their leaderships.
With whistleblowers, when push comes to shove, the whistleblowers are seen by that bipartisan establishment as screwing up the game. And the game is suppression of information, of selectively leaking classified info that the people in power want to, and then to put the kibosh on any information to the general public that we have a right to know in a democracy. And it's very revealing. While Donald Trump has said publicly that he thinks Edward Snowden should get the death penalty, many Democrats, when Snowden went forward and when there was all the first huge uproar and then later, said that he was a traitor. You know, people like Dianne Feinstein and Joe Biden, they cannot abide people like Snowden and Drake and Kiriakou and others. And I think for progressives and for libertarians on the right, it's a real clarion call to say, we stand with those who are beacons of light for information and democracy. We're unwilling to stand with those who want to suppress information to make democracy possible.
All right, thanks very much for joining us, Norman.
Thank you, Paul.
And thank you for joining us on Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network.